Charles Witte was from New York, born on May 27th, 1935. He passed away March 7th, 2003, at the age of 67. And Bobby playing e4, c5, a Sicilian defense, knight f3, d6, d4, pawn takes pawn, and knight takes the pawn, an open Sicilian. We have knight f6, knight c3, a6 is your Najdorf's variation. Bishop c4, when played against Najdorf's, is Lipnitsky's attack. When played against the classical or the Scheveningen, it is the Sozin attack. Nowadays, it's often called the Fischer-Sozin attack. And so e6 makes it a Sozin attack because e6 transposes to a Scheveningen. White castles, and black plays bishop d7. That leaves the opening book. There are two book lines. The most popular is b5, bishop b3, bishop e7, queen f3, queen c7, queen g3, castles, bishop h6, exploiting the pin, knight to e8, defending the pawn, queen's rook to d1, and then bishop d7. Somewhat more comfortable than the second most popular line, at least more comfortable in my way of thinking. But that other line is bishop e7, bishop b3, castles, f4, b5, e5, pawn takes the pawn, pawn takes the pawn, and the king's knight goes to d7. In this game, Charles Witte with bishop d7. Bobby plays bishop b3, bishop e7, bishop e3, castles, now f4, and queen c7 gets the orange question mark from the annotator. More accurate and much more frequently played, in fact, the most frequently played, is knight c6. And that line continues with f5, knight takes knight, bishop takes knight, e5, bishop back to e3, and bishop c6, super attacking the e-man. Instead, Witte played queen c7, which he will come to regret. Here Bobby played pawn g4, king h8, getting a question mark. D4 was, D5, I should say, was certainly worth a try here for black. Instead, king h8 being frowned upon by the annotator. G5 hits the knight, and knight comes to g8. Now expanding with f5. e5 here, and of course developing with knight to c6 is definitely more to my liking. And after pawn takes the pawn, you can play knight takes knight here. That was the line in my mind, the bot calling for pawn takes the pawn. Well, after f5, e5 was played, hitting the knight, and you don't have to run away right away. Because of e5, a hole is created on d5, and that can be occupied with tempo, thereby punctuating the earlier error of queen c7. So after queen d8, knight f3, and the threat here that we don't want to miss is with this knight out of the way, the a7 g1 diagonal opens up so the bishop can come up here to b6 and hit the queen again. No surprise then after bishop c6 to see that move played. Here Witte played queen c8. Queen d7 is a better defense, as indicated here. On queen d7, however, we're going to play knight c7. And black has nothing better than to grab this e-man and let me grab his rookie and eat it like a cookie. Now black gets a smidge of counterplay here, say with queen takes f5, but he's already getting himself into some trouble. Queen c8 is even more worser than the queen d7 line, and Bobby here plays knight takes the bishop, knight takes the knight, and now we have queen takes the d-man. That attacks this undefended knight, which Witte tries to defend with queen e8. Bishop c5 now creates a battery attack against that knight, and that knight is quite indefensible. If you move it out of the way, queen takes the rook, and there's no way to add another defender, so that knight is just gone like the wind. Witte played b6 here, and quite interesting, he does not play queen takes the knight, he plays pawn to f6. On queen takes the knight, pawn takes the bishop, and you have only really gained a pawn, haven't you? You could actually play f6 here. You wouldn't even have to pick up that pawn. So Bobby, recognizing that, went ahead and played f6 right away. Knight g6 now occupies this vacancy and defends the rook. Of course, if he plays pawn takes the pawn, your queen can take with check. And that's just winning, isn't it? Forces the king here, and then we have the knight in our pocket. Not only in our pocket, but that rook can't move, so that would just be winning for white. So knight g6 defends the rook. Pawn takes pawn check, king takes pawn, queen f6 check. And I'm sure you recognize that that's a discovered attack on the rookie. We can eat it like a cookie. After king g8, we win the exchange with bishop takes rook and queen takes rook. And here Bobby brings in his queen's rook to d1, threatening rook d8, which pins the queen to the king. What a horrific situation that is. And there's really no good way to answer this. He tried bishop e8. If you play knight to d7 hitting the queen, we win the bishop for free. So his pieces are overly taxed. So he tried bishop e8, and here queen d6 was played. I'm not sure why he didn't just play queen to d8, to be honest. The bot actually calling for knight takes the pawn on e5. Now that's interesting. What do I get for queen to d8? I get a star. Bobby was one that once he had an advantage, he liked to just go for direct simplification. That was one of the things he did so well. And I've mentioned it many times on this program. So just put the question to the queen. And you could always go queen d8 next if he somehow evades that. So queen d6, knight d7, and queen takes queen, no surprise. King takes queen, h4, rook c8. I really want to emphasize that because a lot of these times when Bobby goes for these direct simplifications and the bot calls them inaccurate, it's very true that they are technically not the most accurate moves, but they are the most practical moves for we humans because once you have that advantage in your pocket, you simplify, you disarm your opponent, and you win the game. Rook d2. A lift and slide in progress, and he has the option of sliding over here or bringing his other rook behind. King e7, pawn h5 hits the knight, knight f4, knight takes the pawn on e5. What a juicy move that is, because after all, that's undefended, right? I mean, can't I just take this? He played knight h3 check, and you see the point here is we are removing the defender of this knight. So if knight takes the knight, then rook takes the other knight. That's the whole point of this situation. So instead, Witte played the check, but king h2, and you better be careful because the rook is aiming at f7 now, and we've got two other pieces looking at that pawn as well. So knight takes the pawn on g5, adds a defender here. Knight takes the knight, bishop takes the knight, And as the position has unfolded, the definitive move is rook df2, battery attacking and super attacking the f-man. So black has to be concerned about rook takes the f-man. The only real way to deal with it is bishop e6, and that's just insufficient, so Witte just abandoned that idea and went with bishop c6. Bishop takes the pawn on f7. Knight takes the pawn on e4. Rook to f5. Bishop to b5. Rook d8 is indicated. That will be answered by bishop b3. Just retreat. And after rook d2 check, we can play king g1. And, you know, we can retract our rook. Again, it's quite flexible. Bishop b5 was played. Rook e5 check. King d6. Rook e6 check. Note that this undefended knight can be captured, but it's nowhere near as good because your rook is en prise. So if you take, I'm sure that'll get a blunder, and it does. And all of a sudden, black is almost equal. In fact, after rook c7, okay, I have a check, but black seems to have gotten himself out of the hole here. One pawn should be holdable. So be careful about that. You gain a tempo with this check, king c5, and this rook moves to f4, out of danger with an attack. Knight d6, rook e5 check, king c6, now pawn c4, a remarkable move. This bishop is trapped. Note that it is twice defended and twice attacked, and as you know, if there are not more attackers than defenders, it's not overpower, it's no-overpower. So he tried knight takes bishop, pawn takes the bishop check. Because it's a check, ladles and jelly spoons, his rook is as safe as a baby in his Betty by. King came to d6 to try to gain some tempo. Go ahead and take my knight, I'll take your rook, and we're even Steven. No such luck, Charles Witte. I will retract my rook to the rank of my king, and this game is nearly over. Knight e5, rook to f6 check, and the only way to maintain a defensive touch on this knight is to play to d5, but that allows rook to f5, super attacking and pinning the knight. And so it was here that Charles Witte resigned the game. The only way to add another defender is rook e8, and on rook e8, we just trade everything down. We don't mind giving back material because we're going to make a passed pawn. And that, ladles and jelly spoons, will be that. The king cannot catch up. Bada bing, bada boom. So a nice game by Bobby Fischer. Let me give you the numbers. Fischer with a 94 accuracy. Witte with an 86.7. Bobby Fischer with a single game assessment rating of 2750. Charles Witte, single game rating assessment 2250. White really outplayed black. He played a bit better than black in the opening and just totally overpowered him in the middle game.